The harvest fair in Willow Creek was supposed to be nothing more than lanterns, laughter, and the smell of caramel apples drifting through the night air. But within the glow of the rides and the music of fiddles, something went terribly wrong. 8-year-old Maya slipped from her mother's grasp for only a heartbeat and vanished. In the chaos, parents clutched their own children tighter. Voices rose in panic, and rumors spread like wildfire. It was as if joy itself had been stolen from the fair. And yet, when fear threatened to consume everything, one figure stepped forward. Not a man, but a German shepherd named Sentinel. Tonight, you'll hear the story of how his nose, his courage, and his unwavering loyalty led him through the flashing lights and laughter into the shadows, where Maya's life hung in the balance. What unfolded next would change not only one little girl's future, but the entire town's faith in the quiet heroism of a dog. The harvest fair arrived in Willow Creek the way autumn always did, gentle at first, then suddenly all-encompassing, until the whole town seemed wrapped in its glow. Lanterns strung between telephone poles gave off a soft amber light, swaying as the evening breeze brushed through. Music spilled from the small stage near the center square, where fiddles and guitars played tunes people in town had known for generations. The scent of caramel apples, popcorn, and fried dough hung thick in the air, mingling with the laughter of children darting between booths. For a night, the town forgot its worries. Shopkeepers had closed early. Teachers who spent their days scolding students now sat at picnic tables with paper plates piled high with barbecue ribs. Even Sheriff Dalton, a man who rarely smiled, leaned against the cotton candy stand and let himself chuckle at a joke told by one of his deputies. There was a tenderness here, the kind that only small towns carried, where everyone's face was familiar and no one's child felt like a stranger. Among the crowd, Eleanor Carter walked slowly, her hand linked with her daughter's. Eleanor's dark hair, pulled into a neat bun, glistened under the lantern light. She wore the look of a woman who had learned to hold both grace and weariness in equal measure. At her side, Maya, just 9 years old, moved with the restless curiosity of a child caught between wonder and timidity. Her eyes, wide and searching, reflected each shimmer of light, each burst of sound, as if the fair were a world she had only ever imagined. "Eleanor," a voice called from across the street. Mrs. Halloway, the baker's wife, waved cheerfully. Elena returned the smile, squeezing Maya's hand in reassurance. "Say hello, sweetheart," she whispered. Maya lifted her hand in a small wave, shy but polite. Her voice rarely carried in crowds, but her eyes spoke enough. They darted, absorbing every detail. A painted clown, twisting balloons into dogs. A teenager, scooping goldfish into tiny bowls. The Ferris wheel, rising and falling like a glowing crown against the deepening sky. Elena knelt briefly, brushing a strand of hair away from Maya's cheek. "Are you doing all right? Not too loud?" Maya nodded, though she tugged gently at her mother's sleeve. Her gaze had caught on the carousel at the far end of the square, its painted horses prancing in circles, lights blinking like stars in rhythm. Children's laughter rose from it, shrill and joyful, and Maya's lips parted in the faintest smile. "Do you want to ride?" Eleanor asked, already knowing the answer. Maya hesitated, then nodded again, a little more eagerly this time. She didn't speak much. Her quiet nature often left others wondering if she was shy or simply lost in her own world. Elena knew the truth. Her daughter was careful. She watched before she leapt, listened before she spoke. "All right," Eleanor said. "Let's get you a ticket." They began weaving through the crowd, Eleanor's grip steady around Maya's small hand. The fair thrummed around them. Neighbors calling greetings, children tugging at parents for sweets, music shifting from one song to another. It was noisy, yes, but beneath it all was a heartbeat of familiarity. Eleanor had grown up in this town, walked these same fairgrounds when she was Maya's age. She wanted her daughter to have that same sense of belonging, but not everything belonged. From the corner of her eye, Eleanor noticed a balloon slipping free of a little boy's hand. It floated upward, its bright red color stark against the indigo sky, until it disappeared into the darkness above. The boy cried out, reaching toward the sky, though he knew it was futile. His mother pulled him close, murmuring comfort. Eleanor watched as Maya's gaze followed the balloon until it vanished, her eyes lingering longer than most children's might. A shadow crossed her expression, a quiet stillness that unsettled Eleanor for reasons she couldn't name. They reached the carousel line, where Maya pressed closer to her mother's side. Eleanor purchased a ticket, slipping it into Maya's palm. The girl clutched it tightly, her gaze fixed on the painted horses rising and falling. The air was filled with organ music, whimsical yet faintly eerie in the way carnival music often was. Maya leaned forward, as though drawn by an invisible string. Yet even as joy tugged at her, something else moved in the shadows beyond the lights. At the edge of the crowd, two figures lingered near the funnel cake stand. They weren't laughing like the others, weren't carrying bags of prizes or plates of food. Their eyes weren't on the fair, but on the people, on the children. One nudged the other subtly, and their gazes shifted toward the carousel where Maya now stood. Elena didn't notice them. She was kneeling again, adjusting the sleeve of Maya's sweater, smoothing the hem as mothers often do when they have nothing else to control. "Remember, hold on tight when you're up there," Elena murmured. Maya gave a small nod, distracted. Her ticket trembled slightly in her grip, not from fear, but from eagerness. The carousel's lights reflected in her eyes, and for a fleeting moment, she looked entirely unburdened, just a child, waiting for her turn to ride. Above them, the red balloon was gone. The music played on, and somewhere, beneath the laughter and light, the first thread of danger quietly tightened. The carousel slowed to a stop, its painted horses settling into place as the music wound down. Children clambered off, clutching stuffed animals and candy, their laughter carrying into the night. Maya still held her ticket in her small fist, waiting her turn. Elena leaned close, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. "Almost time," she whispered. The crowd thickened around them as more families pressed forward, eager to give their children the same brief flight of magic. The line folded in on itself, shoulders and elbows bumping, the scent of fried dough mingling with cologne and sweat. Elena tightened her grip on Maya's hand. "Stay close, sweetheart." Maya nodded, but her gaze stayed locked on the carousel, on the painted horse with the golden mane that she had chosen in her mind. The lantern light flickered across her face, painting it with fleeting shadows. Then the crowd surged. A burst of laughter, a cheer from the ring toss booth, a shuffle of feet. Someone brushed past Elena with a jolt, and in that brief second, her hand slipped from Maya's. "Elena, sorry," a neighbor called as he staggered by, his toddler balanced on his shoulders. Eleanor turned her head just long enough to smile stiffly, then looked back, her palm suddenly empty. Maya had drifted 2 steps forward, swallowed by the press of bodies. "Elena." Her voice was soft, uncertain, nearly drowned by the fair's noise. "Maya," Elena called sharply, lunging forward. But another wave of people pushed between them, a group of teenagers laughing, a couple carrying plates of funnel cake. Elena's eyes darted wildly, searching. For a moment, she glimpsed the bow of Maya's hair ribbon, bobbing like a buoy in a sea of strangers. "Mama?" Maya's call was small, fragile against the cacophony. She turned her head this way and that, her wide eyes scanning faces that were not her mother's. Lights flashed, voices collided, music roared. Panic fluttered in her chest. She tried to step back, but the press of bodies carried her sideways, like a current sweeping her away. Her hand reached out, seeking Elena's, but found only the coarse fabric of a stranger's jacket. "Mama!" she tried again, louder this time, though the word fractured into the festival air. From the edges, two figures watched. One leaned against a food cart, a cap pulled low over his brow. The other scrolled absently through a phone, though his gaze flickered upward often, sharp and searching. They didn't laugh. They didn't cheer. Their stillness marked them, a contrast against the tide of movement around them. The man with the cap nudged the other subtly, tilting his head toward the small figure adrift in the crowd. Maya's world shrank. The carousel's painted horses blurred behind a wall of strangers' backs. She caught sight of a balloon twisting into the night sky, red against black, and for a second she wished she could float away with it, away from the noise, away from the fear creeping into her chest. Her breaths quickened. "Mama!" Some turned at the cry, but no one answered. To them, it was just another child calling out, lost for a moment, soon to be scooped up by a parent. The fair was full of such cries, and most ended in embraces within seconds. But seconds stretched cruelly. Eleanor shoved through the crowd, her voice sharp now, desperate. "Maya!" Her heart hammered, cold fear seeping into her limbs. She called again, louder, startling those nearby. Her eyes scanned every face, every small head of hair, her body moving faster, more frantic. "Mama!" The word carried faintly through the festival noise, and for the briefest instant, mother and daughter's voices seemed to reach for each other across the distance, threads stretched taut, ready to snap. Maya spun in a small circle, her eyes welling with tears. Everywhere she looked were strangers. She saw the Ferris wheel rising above, its lights dizzying. She saw children laughing with sticky fingers. But nowhere, her mother's familiar face. The two figures lingered still. The man with the cap let his hand brush against a chain at his side. A glint of silver caught the lantern light, a ring, heavy, distinct, its design sharp enough to mark him later in memory. He spoke briefly to the other, who tucked the phone away. Their eyes didn't leave Maya. Elena's panic sharpened. Her hands shook as she pushed past people, her breath coming in short, ragged bursts. She tried to recall what Maya was wearing. Blue sweater, jeans, ribbon in her hair. She scanned for that ribbon, but saw only a sea of colors and movement. "Maya!" Her voice cracked now, breaking on the air. The crowd swallowed the answer. Maya stumbled near the edge of the carousel line, her ticket crumpling in her fist. She hugged herself, trying to be small, trying not to cry. She whispered her mother's name once more, but it dissolved into the music. Her vision blurred with tears. And from the shadow beyond the rides, the two strangers took a step forward. At first, Eleanor told herself it was just a moment. Children slipped through crowds all the time, darting toward balloons, tugged toward the scent of candy apples, wandering to chase a friend's laugh. She would find Maya just a few steps away, waiting, eyes wide but safe. That's what she told herself in those first fragile seconds. but seconds grew longer. "Maya!" Eleanor's voice cracked as she surged forward, forcing her way between strangers. The carousel music wound into another tune, bright and mocking. Faces blurred around her. Neighbors, friends, families, but not her child's. She called again, louder, drawing stares now. "Maya!" The crowd seemed endless, every child's head the wrong one. She caught glimpses of blue sweaters, small hands, but each time hope dissolved into panic. Her heart thudded against her ribs, sweat breaking across her forehead despite the autumn chill. "I can't find my daughter," she gasped to a passing vendor. He blinked at her, startled, then immediately looked around, scanning the crowd. Word traveled quickly. Whispers became shouts. A father dropped his plate of food. A mother clutched her toddler tighter, eyes darting nervously. Within minutes, the fair's festive air fractured, joy leaking into fear. Volunteers sprang up. Neighbors, teenagers, even the man running the dart booth. "What's she wearing?" one asked. "Blue sweater, jeans, ribbon in her hair," Elena cried, breathless. "She's 9. Her name is Maya." The announcer's voice crackled over the loudspeakers. "Attention, folks. We have a missing child. 9 years old. Blue sweater, ribbon in her hair. Name's Maya Carter. If anyone sees her, please notify the nearest officer." The words fell heavy across the fairgrounds. Music faltered. Some rides slowed. Parents scooped up children, clutching them close. The night air itself seemed to tremble. Elena pressed her fist to her chest, trembling. Around her, people fanned out in small groups, searching behind food stands, along rows of carnival games, lantern light blurred with the tears stinging her eyes. "Please, God," she whispered, voice breaking. "Please let her be safe." That's when the uniform appeared, steady, composed, purposeful. Officer Daniel Reed cut through the chaos like a man who'd walked into storms before. His face was calm, but his eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen this too many times. At his side padded a German shepherd, tall and alert, every muscle coiled with purpose. The dog's vest read Canine Sentinel in bold white letters. "Elena Carter?" Reed asked firmly, already piecing details together from the chatter. She nodded wildly, clutching at him as though he were her last anchor. "My daughter, she's gone. She was right here, right here." Her words tumbled out, jagged and desperate. Reed crouched to her level, his voice low, steady, meant to cut through the panic. "I need you to breathe. Tell me exactly what she's wearing, and when you last saw her." Elena forced herself to speak, though every word scraped her throat raw. "Blue sweater, jeans, ribbon, carousel line." Reed nodded, his gaze sharp. Then he turned to Sentinel. "Find her." The dog lowered his head instantly, nostrils flaring. He was all precision now, no hesitation. His paws moved with a rhythm born of endless drills, weaving through the press of legs, ignoring shouts, following something unseen. Reed followed close, his hand resting near his holster, his other hand signaling for volunteers to clear a path. Around them, the fair seemed to ripple with tension. Every cry of a child drew startled looks. Every balloon pop sounded like something breaking. Fear spread like wildfire, contagious, uncontainable. The joy of the night had turned brittle, fragile, replaced by whispers of, "How could this happen here?" Elena stumbled behind, her breaths ragged, eyes darting. She caught sight of Sentinel moving, purposeful, his ears pricked, his body taut like a bowstring. People parted as he passed, their gazes filled with both dread and hope. And then, fireworks exploded overhead. The first blast painted the sky crimson. Children gasped, some clapping, others crying at the noise. Sparks rained down in golden arcs, illuminating the crowd in surreal bursts. For a heartbeat, the world was awash in color, red, blue, gold, and Elena thought she glimpsed Maya's ribbon in the distance. She lunged forward, shouting her daughter's name, but when the light faded, it was gone. Only strangers turned to stare, their faces half lit by fire and shadow. "Maya!" Elena screamed, her voice carrying raw and sharp, cutting through the music and the fireworks alike. Her cry echoed across the fairground, high and shattering, a sound that silenced even those who had never known fear like hers. And above it, the next firework burst open, scattering sparks like falling stars. The fairgrounds, once pulsing with laughter and music, had fallen into an uneasy hush. The Ferris wheel still turned, its bulbs blinking in cheery rhythm, but the mood beneath it had shifted, fragile, uncertain, like glass under too much weight. The loudspeaker crackled overhead, the tinny sound slicing through the air. "Attention, folks," the announcer's voice wavered, strained. "We have a missing child, 9 years old. Name is Maya Carter. She was last seen near the carousel, wearing a blue sweater and a ribbon in her hair. If you see her, please notify the nearest officer immediately." The words rolled over the crowd like a dark tide. People stopped mid-step. Paper cups of lemonade paused halfway to lips. Somewhere, a child dropped a stuffed bear, its button eyes staring up from the dirt as the boy clutched at his mother's skirt, his small voice whispering, "Don't let me go." The music on the stage faltered, then died altogether. The fiddler lowered his bow, scanning the faces around him as though searching for a glimpse of the missing girl himself. The cotton candy machine whirred to a stop, its vendor frozen, pink sugar drifting into the air like smoke. Parents moved instinctively. They gathered children closer, hands tightening around wrists and shoulders, as if the simple act of holding on might protect them from the same fate. A woman scooped her toddler into her arms and pressed his head against her chest. A father lifted his son from the ground, ignoring the boy's protest, his eyes darting nervously at every shadow. The crowd had become a living thing, its joy gone, its body tense, its heart pounding in fear. Through it all, Elena stumbled forward, her hands trembling, her breath jagged in her throat. "Please," she begged, gripping the arm of a young officer who had been posted near the carousel. "Don't just make announcements. She's 9 years old. She's out there right now." Her eyes blazed, desperate. "Don't waste time. Do something." The officer swallowed hard, torn between protocol and the weight of a mother's plea. "Ma'am, we have officers searching. We'll find her." "That's not enough." Elena's voice cracked, drawing the attention of those nearby. "You don't understand. Maya doesn't talk much. She won't call out. She's scared of strangers. She won't know who to trust." Her words cut through the murmurs, sharpening the fear that already gripped the parents in earshot. A woman holding her child closer turned away, her face pale. A teenager dropped his game prize, a cheap plastic toy, forgotten as his eyes darted uneasily to the dark edges of the fairgrounds. Overhead, the loudspeaker called again. "Maya Carter, 9 years old, blue sweater. Please remain calm and assist if you can." But calm had vanished. The fair was unraveling. The Ferris wheel operator stopped his ride midway, lowering the cars so parents could retrieve their children. The carousel lights blinked nervously, no longer inviting. Families began drifting toward the exits, their faces tight, some whispering prayers, others already pointing fingers at fair organizers. Elena pressed a hand to her chest, as if to steady the storm inside her. Her eyes scanned the crowd again, willing Maya to appear. Every blue shirt twisted her gut. Every ribbon of color caught her breath. But each time, hope shattered on the wrong face. "Ma'am," another officer approached, older this time, trying to project calm. "We're bringing in more volunteers. We'll have search teams covering every section of the fairgrounds. We need you to stay here, so if she comes back—" "I can't just stand here," Elena snapped, her voice raw. "She's out there. She's scared. Every second you wait, she's—" Her words broke into sobs. She covered her mouth with her hand, her body shaking. The older officer hesitated, then placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "We've called in K9. He'll be here any moment. He's the best chance we've got." The crowd shifted again, murmurs rising, hope flickering faintly through fear. Some children looked at the adults with wide, confused eyes. Others, sensing the tension but not the reason, began to cry. A balloon popped somewhere in the distance, sharp and sudden. Dozens of heads turned at once, the crowd so on edge it nearly jumped at shadows. Eleanor's gaze darted upward. The fireworks were scheduled to continue, but the organizers had delayed them now, unwilling to paint the sky with celebration while a child was missing. The silence of that decision pressed down on the town even harder. Her knees nearly gave out beneath her, but she forced herself to remain standing. "Please," she whispered again, though this time her words were less command and more prayer. "Please don't waste time." The announcer's voice crackled once more. "Repeat. Missing child, Maya Carter, 9 years old, last seen near the carousel." And all across the fairground, parents bent low to their children, whispering the same vow. "I won't let you go." The night pressed heavier now, the laughter of an hour ago replaced by the low hum of fear. Flashlights bobbed across the fairgrounds, beams sweeping under picnic tables, darting into alleys between booths, searching shadows where moments earlier children had chased each other without care. At the center of the chaos stood Officer Daniel Reed, his jaw set, his shoulders squared with the calm authority of a man who had seen nights like this before. At his side, steady and silent, stood Sentinel, the German shepherd whose dark coat glistened under the lantern glow. The dog's eyes scanned the shifting crowd, ears pricked, every sense alert. "Elena," Reed said gently but firmly, motioning her closer. She stumbled toward him, her breath uneven, clutching something in her hand. It was Maya's scarf, soft, light blue, embroidered at the ends by Elena's own mother. The scarf smelled faintly of cinnamon and apples from earlier that day, when Maya had wrapped it around her neck before leaving for the festival. "This," Reed said, lowering himself to one knee. "Let me have it." Elena's fingers trembled as she placed the scarf into his palm. "She wore it this afternoon," she whispered, as though the words themselves were fragile. Reed crouched before Sentinel, holding the scarf close. The dog's nose twitched, inhaling deeply. Then his entire body shifted. His muscles coiled, his chest expanded, and his tail stiffened. The playful ease of a dog at rest vanished. In its place was the sharpened edge of instinct and training. "Find her," Reed commanded softly. Sentinel lowered his head until the scarf nearly brushed his muzzle. His nostrils flared, drawing in every fiber of scent. The salt of tears, the faint sugar of caramel, the specific trace of the child who had worn it. For him, the world narrowed to a single trail, invisible to human eyes, but vivid as fire. His ears flicked back once, then forward. He stepped in a tight circle, nose skimming the ground, testing the air currents. Then, with a sudden snap of focus, he turned sharply toward the heart of the fair and froze, his body taut, tail rigid, eyes burning forward like twin lanterns. Reed rose, his own pulse quickening though his voice remained calm. "He's got something." Around them, the crowd drew back instinctively. People murmured, some crossing themselves, others clutching children tighter as they watched the shepherd transform into something elemental, part guardian, part hunter. Elena's hands twisted together, white-knuckled. Her breath hitched as she stared at Sentinel. For a moment she saw not just a dog, but a line of hope pulling her daughter back from the dark. She took a step closer, crouching low. Her hand trembled as it reached out, brushing the thick fur at Sentinel's neck. The dog's head turned slightly, one amber eye glancing at her, steady and unblinking. It was the briefest acknowledgement, but to Elena it felt like a vow. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Bring my baby back." The words clung in the cool night air, not loud enough for the crowd, but sharp enough to cut Reed to his core. He had heard mothers beg before, at accident sites, at crime scenes, outside hospital rooms. But something in Elena's voice pierced him deeper. It was the raw edge of someone whose world hung by a single thread, and that thread now rested in the jaws of a German shepherd. Sentinel gave a low, guttural whine, quiet, almost imperceptible, but enough. He understood. He pressed forward, nose to the earth again, muscles rippling under his vest. His paws carried him steadily, the crowd parting as though a tide shifted around him. Reed fell in step beside him, one hand hovering near his holster, the other ready to steady Elena if she faltered. "Stay behind us," he said firmly to her. "He knows what he's doing." Elena nodded, wiping at her eyes. She didn't trust her voice. The fairground lights flickered in the distance. Somewhere, a child cried, too high-pitched, too brief to be Maya. Sentinel ignored it, his nose locked on the thread that belonged only to her. Each breath pulled him further into focus, the world shrinking to the invisible trail he alone could follow. Reed watched him, his chest tightening with the familiar mix of awe and dependence. He had trained with Sentinel for years, had seen him find hidden narcotics, trace fleeing suspects, even track a wounded hiker lost in the woods. But this was different. This wasn't about law or order. This was about a little girl's life, about giving a mother back what the world had just stolen. Around them, the festival continued to fracture. Volunteers with flashlights fanned out. Officers barked orders into radios. The announcer's voice repeated Maya's name again and again, now edged with desperation. Each time it echoed, Elena flinched as though her child were fading further into the night. Then Sentinel pulled sharply to the left, nearly jerking Reed off balance. His nails scraped against the pavement as he lunged forward, nose low, tail rigid. A growl rumbled in his throat. Not anger, but certainty. "He's on it," Reed said quickly. Elena staggered after them, her heart pounding in rhythm with Sentinel's paws. Her hand brushed his fur one last time before he surged ahead. She whispered to herself now, clinging to that touch as though it were a promise. "Find her, boy. Please. Find her." And with each breath, each determined step, the shepherd carried that prayer like a torch into the darkness. Sentinel surged forward like an arrow loosed from a bow, his body low and taut, the leather leash stretched tight in Officer Reed's grip. The fairground, once a haven of light and laughter, became an obstacle course of chaos. Balloons drifting into his path, children darting across walkways, rides flashing in dizzy bursts of color. "Clear the way," Reed barked, his voice cutting through the noise. Volunteers and townsfolk stumbled back, pressing against booths and fences as the shepherd cut a line through the crowd. Maya's scent threaded the air, delicate, easily lost in the storm of sugar, grease, and sweat. But Sentinel clung to it with the intensity of survival. His nose skimmed the ground, rose briefly into the air, then dropped again, every nerve locked on the trail. His ears twitched at the overlapping noise, children crying, parents shouting, the carousel still spinning, but he didn't falter. Elena staggered behind, her chest tight, her breath shallow. She could barely keep up, her eyes locked on the dog's dark form. Each time Sentinel lunged forward, hope clawed at her chest. Each time he slowed, her stomach turned cold. They passed the balloon stand, where helium globes bumped against one another, strings tangling like veins. One balloon slipped loose, drifting down directly into Sentinel's path. He snapped past it, his shoulder brushing it aside, nose never breaking stride. His growl vibrated faintly, warning the world not to interrupt his hunt. Reed's eyes scanned every direction, hand near his holster. He knew kidnappers often doubled back, hid in plain sight, used noise and crowd to their advantage. But Sentinel's certainty kept him moving. Then the trail faltered. Near the Ferris wheel, Sentinel stopped abruptly, circling tight. His nose skimmed one patch of gravel, then another, his body tense, his tail flicking with agitation. He barked once, sharp, frustrated. Reed's stomach sank. "Stay with it, boy," he urged. Elena froze, her hands clutching at her chest. "Don't lose her. Please don't let him lose her." Sentinel doubled back suddenly, pulling them a few yards in the opposite direction. Reed followed, trusting him. The shepherd's nails clicked against pavement, his chest rising and falling faster. For a moment, he paused at the base of a bench, sniffing hard at a child's dropped sweater. Then he dismissed it, ears flattening, before yanking forward again. Elena's breath caught. She swore she could hear Maya's voice, faint, carried in the air. "Mama!" She spun, searching wildly, but there was only laughter from the roller coaster, shrieks of children who didn't know fear yet. The sound cut her deeper than silence would have. Sentinel darted between the cotton candy booth and the dart game. His body became a streak of motion, sleek, relentless. People gasped, some clapping hands to their mouths as they realized what was happening. "The canine's got something," voices murmured. Hope rippled, fragile but real. They followed the trail past the last arc of booths. The lights grew sparser, the laughter fainter. Sentinel slowed, head lifting, nostrils flaring wide. His ears pivoted toward the darker edge of the fairground. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Reed felt it vibrate through the leash. His heart tightened. "You've got it, Sentinel," he whispered. The shepherd pulled harder now, dragging them past the final line of rides. Behind them, the glow of lanterns faded. Before them stretched the dim edges where grass turned to dirt, where the fairground gave way to forgotten space. The air smelled different here. Less sugar, more rust, damp wood, oil. Sentinel's tail stiffened, his body rigid. They stopped in front of it, a rusted trailer, paint peeling, its windows darkened. The door hung crooked on its hinges, padlocked at the handle. It sat hunched at the edge of the grounds, half hidden by stacks of unused equipment. Sentinel froze. His body locked into a stance Reed knew too well. Front paw braced, head lowered, growl rising like thunder deep in his chest. His ears strained forward, listening. His nose twitched, confirming. His eyes burned into the trailer's shadows. Elena staggered to a halt beside them. Her breath stopped entirely, her whole body leaning toward the trailer, as if pulled by a string. Maya. Her voice was only a whisper, breaking on the name. Sentinel growled louder, teeth flashing as he pressed closer. His body blocked the trailer door as though daring anything inside to come out. Reed's hand dropped to his holster. His eyes scanned the shadows, his body tense, calculating the angles, the danger. He didn't need Sentinel's growl to tell him they had found something. Behind them, the fairground noise seemed impossibly distant, as though they had crossed into another world. Elena's knees buckled, and she clutched Reed's arm, her eyes wide, pleading. The shepherd's growl deepened. The trail had ended here, and whatever lay inside the rusted trailer was no longer just shadows. The rusted trailer loomed at the far edge of the fairgrounds like a forgotten relic, its once white paint mottled into flakes of brown and gray. Weeds curled around its tires, long since surrendered to decay, and a padlock clung to its crooked door like a clenched jaw. The fair's glow didn't reach here, only the stray flicker of lantern light that caught on broken glass and shadows. Sentinel stopped cold in front of it. His body stiffened, ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring with violent precision. The low growl that rolled from his chest wasn't the bark of a dog startled by strangers. It was the ancient warning of a predator, certain of prey. His lips curled, just enough to reveal the gleam of teeth. The leash trembled in Officer Reed's grip, though not from Sentinel's hesitation. There was no hesitation, only purpose. Reed's pulse quickened. He had seen Sentinel track dozens of times, had followed him into alleyways and abandoned houses, had trusted him to lead officers to drugs, weapons, fugitives. But this sound, the deep, vibrating growl, he knew it well. It was Sentinel's signal for danger, the sound that always came when the dog had found not just a scent, but the very thing that didn't belong. Reed's hand went instinctively to his holster. His eyes swept the dark edges of the trailer, scanning for movement, for shadows that shifted. He felt the air itself thicken with the weight of possibility. "Easy, boy," Reed murmured, though he didn't truly mean it. He wanted the growl. He needed it. Behind him, Elena stood, frozen, her hand clamped against her mouth. Her body leaned toward the trailer as if her soul already knew what was inside. Her lips parted, trembling. Maya. The name broke from her like a prayer, almost lost in the night. Then came the sound, faint at first, nearly drowned by the hum of distant rides and the muffled throb of music still spilling from the fair. But it was there, a whimper, small, fragile, the kind of sound a child makes when she's trying not to cry, when fear holds her tighter than tears can. Elena stiffened, her eyes wild. "Did you hear that?" Reed's jaw clenched. He lifted his free hand, signaling her to stay back. "Stay behind me." His voice was low, sharp, not unkind, but commanding. He couldn't afford her panic, not now. The whimper came again, clearer this time. It was followed by the faint scrape of movement, then silence. Reed's breath tightened in his chest. He edged closer to the trailer, each step measured. His boots crunched on gravel. Sentinel's growl deepened, vibrating like a string drawn taut. His tail stiffened, his body leaning forward, as if every muscle begged to be unleashed. "Easy," Reed said again, though this time it was more to himself than the dog. He reached the door. The padlock glinted faintly, rust caked around its hinges. Reed shifted slightly, listening. His hand hovered just above the holster, fingers grazing the cool grip of his sidearm. Every instinct screamed at him. Danger was not just possible, it was near, close enough to taste. Behind him, Elena broke. "That's her! That's my baby!" Her voice was raw, too loud, carrying across the empty field. Reed spun his head, eyes sharp. "Elena, stay back." His words were urgent, clipped. Sentinel barked once, sharp and explosive, as if echoing Reed's command. The bark rattled against the trailer's walls. For a heartbeat, silence answered. Then, muffled, unmistakable. A sob. Elena's knees buckled. She caught herself against a post, her hands trembling. Tears spilled freely now, streaking her cheeks. "She's in there." Her words broke into sobs. Reed turned back to the door, his jaw tight. He motioned to Sentinel, whose entire body was coiled like a spring, head low, ears forward. The shepherd's growl rose again, low and steady, vibrating like thunder under Reed's hand. "Back up," Reed muttered, into the radio clipped to his shoulder. His voice was steady, but his heartbeat thundered in his chest. "Suspicious trailer. Possible child inside. Need units now." The radio crackled in response, voices promising backup. But Reed knew every second mattered. He could feel Elena's eyes burning into his back, feel her fear pressing him forward. He crouched lower, examining the door. The padlock was old, rust eating its edges, but still secure. The hinges sagged, strained with years of weather. He tested the handle lightly, locked tight. Inside, another sound came, this time closer. A muffled cry, choked off quickly. Reed's chest tightened. "Maya," he whispered under his breath. Though he'd never spoken the girl's name before tonight, it felt sacred in the air, like a vow. Sentinel lunged suddenly, teeth snapping against the air just inches from the door. His growl broke into a vicious snarl, chest vibrating with fury. His paws clawed at the dirt, demanding action. He knew. He knew. Reed steadied him with a firm hand against the harness. "Not yet," he murmured. But even as he said it, he felt the same fire rising in his chest. The line between caution and instinct blurred. Behind him, Eleanor whispered through her tears, "Please, don't let her be afraid." Reed didn't look back. His eyes stayed locked on the trailer, on the shadows beyond its walls. His hand settled firmly on his sidearm. And Sentinel's growl rose higher, louder, rattling the night, echoing through the empty field like a promise that the darkness inside had been found. The night seemed to hold its breath. Sentinel's growl rumbled against the metal of the trailer, each vibration making the door tremble faintly in its hinges. Reed pressed a hand to the radio on his shoulder, his voice low but urgent. "Unit 4, Unit 7, I've got a possible location. Suspicious trailer north end of the fairgrounds. I can hear the child. Request immediate backup." The radio crackled, promises of movement spilling through, but Reed didn't wait. He couldn't. His instincts screamed that time was unraveling thread by thread. "Stay back," he hissed again to Elena, who was gripping the side of a food cart, her knuckles white, her breath jagged. Tears carved down her face, but her eyes stayed locked on the trailer, as if sheer will could pry it open. Inside, the voices started. "Shut her up," a man hissed, the sound muffled but unmistakable. Panic laced the words, high-pitched and cracking at the edges. "I am," another snapped, deeper, harder, his tone more controlled, but dripping with menace. "Keep it together. Just keep it together." Reed froze, every muscle taut, his ears strained to catch each syllable. Two men, one already losing nerve. The other, dangerously calm. That was the worst kind. Sentinel's snarl deepened, his teeth bared fully now, saliva stringing between them as he lunged forward, his front paws striking the metal with a clang that echoed through the field. Inside, a curse rang out. "Damn dog. He knows." Reed lifted his free hand, signaling silently as shadows moved behind him. Two officers arrived, their flashlights cutting through the dark. They lowered their beams instantly at Reed's motion, crouching low, their weapons drawn, eyes wide as they took in the shepherd pressed against the trailer door like a living battering ram. Reed's voice was firm, quiet. 2, inside. Child confirmed. 1 panicked. 1 steady. Be ready. The younger officer swallowed, nodding. His grip on his weapon tightened. The older one exhaled slowly, his gaze locked on the trailer as if he could see through it. Another cry came from within, small and broken. Maya's. It was muffled, as though buried under cloth, but the raw fear in it pierced straight through the night. Eleanor collapsed against the cart, sobbing into her hands. "That's her. That's my baby." Reed's jaw set. He turned back to the trailer, his voice raised but controlled. "Police, step out slowly with your hands up." Silence. Then the deep voice answered, mocking. "We're not coming out. You take 1 step closer, and the girl doesn't leave this trailer breathing." The words sliced through the air like a blade. Reed's stomach dropped, but his expression didn't falter. He had to stay steady. For Eleanor, for the officers, for Maya. "Listen to me," he said, voice projecting with calm authority. "You don't want this to end badly. Let the girl go. We can talk about the rest. But if you hurt her—" "Shut up!" the panicked one screamed, his voice cracking. There was a scuffle inside. Footsteps shuffling, something heavy knocked over. "This is all messed up. We weren't supposed to—" "Quiet!" the deeper voice snapped, hard and final. The kind of command that silenced even the trembling. Sentinel lunged again, his bark erupting like thunder. The entire trailer shook with the impact of his body, the metal door rattling in its frame. The dog's growl rolled on, endless, his eyes locked, unyielding. Inside, panic rose. "He's gonna break the door down. Do something." "Shut up." Reed seized the moment. He gestured sharply to his officers, signaling positions. One moved left, crouching near the rear wheel. The other slid right, his flashlight beam cutting only the dirt. Reed himself inched forward, hand on his weapon, the other hand steady on Sentinel's harness. "Elena," he said sharply without turning. "Stay down. Don't move." She sank to her knees, sobs racking her, her face buried in her hands, but she forced herself to stay quiet. Her child's life depended on silence now. Reed's voice cut the night again. "You're surrounded. More units are coming. If you hurt that girl, you won't make it out alive. Let her go. End this before it gets worse." For a heartbeat, silence pressed in. Then the panicked one spoke again, near hysterical. "I told you this was a mistake. I told you. She's just a kid." The deeper voice roared, the sound muffled but vicious. "Do you want to walk out of here or not? Keep your mouth shut." Sentinel barked once more, violent and sharp, and slammed into the door with his chest. The snarl that followed wasn't the sound of warning anymore. It was a declaration, a line drawn. The officers froze, waiting for Reed's command. Reed's own pulse thundered, but his eyes stayed fixed, his body taut. Inside the trailer, Maya whimpered again, faint, terrified. It was enough to push Eleanor past her breaking point. Her scream tore across the night, raw, uncontainable. "Maya!" The sound shattered what little calm remained. Sentinel lunged so hard the leash nearly ripped from Reed's hand, his teeth gnashing against the edge of the door, the metal groaning in protest. The standoff had broken wide open. Reed's hand shot up, the silent signal for his officers to move. Sentinel's body strained like a drawn bow, his teeth gnashing against the thin seam of the trailer door. Inside, the men shouted, their voices breaking with panic and rage. "We have to move now," Reed muttered, his eyes never leaving the rust-streaked padlock. He nodded once to the older officer. The officer swung the steel pry bar they'd carried for emergencies. The first strike rang out like a gunshot, reverberating through the fairground's stillness. Metal screeched, sparks flying as the padlock strained. "Again!" Reed barked. The second strike split the rusted shackle. The padlock snapped and fell to the dirt with a heavy clink. Sentinel exploded forward, his chest slamming into the trailer door. The hinges screamed in protest, then burst wide open. What lay inside froze everyone where they stood. The air was stale, thick with sweat, fear, and the metallic tang of rust. A single lantern cast a weak, swinging glow across the cramped space. And there, huddled in the corner, her wrists bound with coarse rope, her mouth gagged with a dirty rag, sat Maya. Her wide eyes glistened with tears, shimmering in the dim light. She trembled so violently that her knees knocked together, her small frame swallowed by terror. For a moment, she didn't move. I didn't believe it. Couldn't trust the burst of light after hours of shadow. "Clear the way!" Reed shouted, storming in, weapon raised. The two men were inside. One pressed flat against the far wall, his face pale, his hands shaking as though his bones themselves had turned liquid. The other, taller, harder, stood defiant, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning with rage. He stepped forward as though daring them to come closer. But Sentinel was already there. The shepherd lunged into the trailer, his body a storm of muscle and sound. His snarl erupted, savage and unrelenting, reverberating off the walls. He planted himself between Maya and the kidnappers, his stance wide, his teeth bared, his body a shield of flesh and fury. The taller man froze, his defiance faltering as the shepherd's growl filled the room. For the first time, fear cracked through his mask. "Get that dog back!" he barked, though his voice trembled. Reed stepped in, his weapon raised. "Hands up! Now!" The younger man's hands shot skyward, his chest heaving. "I didn't want this. I didn't—" His words crumbled into sobs. The taller one hesitated. His eyes darted to Maya, then to Sentinel, whose teeth gleamed in the lantern light. The shepherd's growl rolled deeper, a warning older than words. One wrong move, and he would strike. Slowly, reluctantly, the man lifted his hands. "Fine," he spat, his voice bitter. "Fine." "On the ground," Reed snapped. The officers surged forward, forcing both men down. The sound of metal cuffs locking tight rang through the trailer, sharp and final. And then, silence. Only the ragged breaths of Maya remained, broken and trembling. Sentinel's growl softened, fading into a low whine as he turned his head, finally looking at her. His eyes, so fierce seconds before, melted into something gentler, something steady. He stepped closer, lowering his head, sniffing her bound wrists. Maya flinched at first, then froze, her eyes locking onto his. The world around her blurred, officers shouting, the men cursing, the cuffs clicking shut. All she saw was the shepherd. His eyes told her what words could not. "You're safe. I'm here now." "Elena!" Reed shouted over his shoulder. Her name was barely out before Eleanor stumbled forward. She shoved past the officers, her knees striking the trailer floor as she collapsed beside her daughter. "Maya! Oh, baby!" Her hands shook violently as she pulled the rag from Maya's mouth, then worked frantically at the ropes. The moment the gag fell, Maya released a broken sob, collapsing against her mother's chest. Elena wrapped her arms around her, holding her as if to fuse their bodies back together. Her sobs poured into Maya's hair, her tears soaking the child's sweater. I'm here. You're safe now. Mama's here. Maya clung desperately, her thin fingers gripping her mother's blouse with feral strength. She didn't speak, but her cry was raw, unrestrained, the kind that comes only when a child knows she has finally been found. Sentinel lingered close, his head hovering just inches from Maya's knees. He didn't move until her sobs quieted enough for her to notice him again. Slowly, with trembling fingers, Maya reached out and touched the thick fur at his neck. The shepherd lowered himself into a sit, still and steady, his body still between her and the men in cuffs. His growl had vanished, replaced by the silent vow of a guardian who would not leave until the danger was gone. Reed stood in the doorway, his gun lowered now, his chest heaving with the release of breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He watched the scene, mother and daughter clinging, the shepherd holding the line, the kidnappers shackled, and felt something tight inside him ease. Behind him, backup officers rushed in, voices filling the night with reports and orders. But their words blurred, meaningless against the sound of Elena's sobs and Maya's small, broken breaths. Elena pulled back just enough to cradle Maya's face in her hands. "Look at me, baby," she whispered, her forehead pressed to her daughter's. "You're safe. You're safe because of him." Her eyes flicked to Sentinel, shimmering with gratitude that words could never capture. Maya followed her gaze, her tear-filled eyes locking onto the shepherd again. She clutched his fur tighter, her lips quivering around words too soft to hear. Sentinel leaned closer, resting his head against her small arm, sealing the bond that had already been forged in the darkest of moments. Elena collapsed fully then, her body folding to the floor of the trailer, sobbing into her daughter's hair, holding her as if the world itself might try to take her again. And Sentinel stayed pressed between them and the shadows, his body a living wall, his eyes never leaving the door, even as the kidnappers were dragged away. The trailer door swung wide into the night, and with it, the world outside crashed back in, sirens wailing, radios crackling, the strobe of red and blue lights sweeping over the fairgrounds. The field beyond, once only lantern-lit, was now ablaze with the harsh glare of flood lamps hurriedly set up by first responders. The quiet corner where Maya had been hidden moments before was suddenly the epicenter of chaos. 2 paramedics rushed forward with a stretcher, their uniforms flashing white in the light. Reporters swarmed the edges of the cordon, their cameras snapping like gunfire, voices calling out questions that cut like static. "Officer Reed, is the child alive? Can you confirm if the kidnappers are local? Ma'am, what's her name? What happened?" The words battered the air, but Elena heard none of it. She crouched on the dirt, cradling Maya against her chest, shielding her small frame with her own body as though the chaos itself were another predator trying to take her. She rocked gently, her lips pressed to her daughter's hair, whispering again and again, "You're safe, baby. You're safe now. Mama's here. No one's going to hurt you." Maya clung tightly, her face buried in her mother's blouse, her small hands gripping with desperate strength. She didn't look at the lights, didn't listen to the noise. Her world was narrowed to the steady rhythm of her mother's heart and the warmth of her arms. Sentinel sat a few feet away, his body tall, his ears pricked. Though cuffed men were being shoved into patrol cars nearby, though cameras flashed at every angle, the shepherd remained calm and steady. His chest rose and fell in slow, even breaths, but his eyes stayed sharp, tracking every movement within reach of the girl he had pulled back from the dark. To onlookers, he looked like a statue carved from shadow and light, but Reed, standing just behind him, knew better. He recognized the minute tension in Sentinel's muscles, the way his nose flared at each new scent, the silent readiness to spring at the smallest threat. The dog was at ease, but not at rest. He wouldn't rest until Maya was home again. "Clear a path for the medics," an officer shouted, his voice harsh above the din. The crowd shifted reluctantly, reporters jostling against the tape. The paramedics moved forward with soft urgency, kneeling beside Elena. "Ma'am, we need to check her. Make sure she's all right." Elena's arms tightened instinctively. "She's not leaving me." Her voice cracked, fierce and desperate. "Do whatever you need here. She doesn't let go of me." The younger medic nodded gently, crouching lower. "That's all right. We'll work around you." His hands were careful as he shone a small penlight toward Maya's eyes, murmuring assurances she barely heard. The other medic began checking her pulse, her breathing, examining the rope burns on her wrists. Elena kissed the top of Maya's head. "See, baby? They're just making sure you're okay. Nobody's taking you away." Maya shivered, but didn't move. Her fists still knotted in her mother's blouse. Behind them, Reed kept the reporters at bay with curt words and the steady presence of uniformed officers. "No statements now. Step back. Give them space." He scanned the crowd, watching fear ripple through parents who now clutched their children tighter, whispering reassurances that rang hollow. He knew tonight would mark the town forever. The harvest fair would never be remembered for its music or lanterns again, only for the child who vanished and the shepherd who found her. Sentinel shifted slightly, his head turning as another ambulance pulled into the field, its headlights washing the trailer in pale light. He glanced once at Reed, then back at Maya, as though making sure his handler understood. His job wasn't finished. Reed crouched down beside him, his hand brushing the thick fur along his neck. "Good boy," he murmured, low enough that only Sentinel could hear. The shepherd's ears flicked, but his gaze never left the child. Elena lifted her head briefly, her eyes red, her cheeks streaked with dirt and tears. She looked at Sentinel, and for a moment words failed her. Gratitude swelled in her chest, too large for speech. Instead, she reached out with one shaking hand, brushing her fingers gently across the shepherd's head. "Thank you," she whispered. Sentinel blinked slowly, leaning just slightly into her touch, before returning his gaze to the perimeter. The officers began pushing reporters further back, lights cutting harsh angles across the dirt. The kidnappers were shoved into squad cars, their curses muffled by the slam of doors. The fair's rides, still half-lit in the distance, stood frozen, eerily abandoned. Laughter no longer carried from the square. Only the echo of radios and the whine of sirens filled the air now. "All right," one medic said softly, looking up at Reed. "She's stable. No serious injuries, but she needs to be taken in. Dehydrated, frightened, but she'll be okay." Elena tightened her hold again. "I'm going with her." "Of course," the medic assured quickly. They moved carefully, lifting both mother and child together onto the stretcher. Elena still wrapped protectively around Maya. The little girl's eyes finally lifted for a moment. She glanced toward Sentinel as the stretcher tilted upward. Her lips trembled, but her gaze held his steady. Sentinel rose to his feet, following as far as the leash would allow, his tail low, his posture alert. He let out one soft whine, a sound that slipped beneath the noise of chaos, meant only for her. Maya's hand lifted weakly from her mother's blouse, stretching toward him. Her fingers brushed air, but the gesture spoke louder than words. "Don't leave me." Reed stepped closer, his hand tightening on Sentinel's harness. "He's right here," he promised quietly, meeting Eleanor's tear-filled gaze. "He's not going anywhere." As the stretcher rolled toward the waiting ambulance, Eleanor bent low, whispering into Maya's ear, the words steady and soothing despite her own trembling. "It's over now, baby. You're safe. He found you. You're safe." And Sentinel walked beside them, steady and unyielding, the calm at the center of chaos, his eyes reflecting the flashing lights, as though he carried the night itself in his gaze. The ambulance doors slammed shut, sealing the night and its chaos outside. For a moment, silence lingered inside, heavy and raw, broken only by the low hum of the engine and the faint, steady beep of medical monitors. Maya sat on the stretcher, wrapped in a thin blanket the paramedics had draped around her shoulders. Her cheeks were pale, streaked with dried tears, her eyes wide and hollow with exhaustion. She didn't speak. She hadn't since they pulled her out of the trailer. Her small hands clutched tightly, not to her mother this time, but to Sentinel's collar. The German shepherd sat pressed against the stretcher, his body still and solid. The flashing red lights from outside pulsed through the narrow windows, catching in his dark fur, making him seem like a sentinel carved from shadow and flame. His amber eyes flicked between the girl's trembling face and the shifting world beyond the ambulance's rear doors. He didn't move, didn't flinch. He simply was, and for Maya that was enough. Elena leaned over her daughter, stroking her hair with shaking hands, whispering words that felt inadequate in the thick air. "It's over now, baby. You're safe. Mama's here." She kissed her daughter's temple again and again, as if to reassure herself she wasn't dreaming. But she noticed something. Every time she whispered, Maya's grip didn't tighten on her blouse. It tightened on Sentinel's collar instead. Reed sat opposite them, his hands clasped loosely, his eyes drawn to the girl, then to the shepherd. He had insisted Sentinel ride along, against standard protocol. "She needs him," he told the medics, his tone leaving no room for argument. They hadn't protested. Even they could see the bond forming, as fragile and immediate as it was. The ambulance rattled over a bump, jolting everyone inside. Elena gasped, steadying Maya, but the girl didn't cry out. She simply buried her face deeper into Sentinel's neck, her fingers winding tighter into his fur, as though the shepherd were the only tether keeping her from slipping back into the nightmare. Reed's throat tightened. He leaned back against the cool metal wall of the ambulance, closing his eyes for a moment. In the darkness behind his lids, old memories surfaced, unbidden. Another night, another child. A bonfire that spread too fast. A girl trapped inside, her cries carrying into the smoke. They had pulled her out too late. He still remembered the look on her mother's face, vacant, shattered, as she held her daughter's hand on the stretcher. Another case, a boy taken from a playground. Sentinel had tracked hard, fast, but they had been 2 hours too late. Reed had stood in the rain outside the crime scene, his uniform soaked, Sentinel pressed against his leg, both of them silent, the weight of failure pressing like stone on his chest. He opened his eyes again. The sight before him was different. For the first time in years, he wasn't carrying another loss. He was watching life, fragile, trembling, but alive. Sentinel shifted slightly, lowering his head until his chin rested on the edge of the stretcher. Maya's small hand moved almost unconsciously, stroking the thick fur along his neck. She didn't speak. Her silence was deep, as if words had been stolen from her, but the way she leaned into him was louder than any cry. Reed studied her, his chest heavy with something he rarely let himself feel on the job. Hope. The girl had chosen Sentinel, not him, not the paramedics, not even the flashing lights and uniforms that promised safety. She trusted the shepherd who had growled at her captors and blocked her from their reach. Reed had seen that bond form before, between handler and dog, but between stranger's child and canine, so sudden, so complete, it was something else. Elena noticed it too. Her hand lingered on her daughter's back, but her gaze drifted to Sentinel. Gratitude swelled in her eyes, so fierce and overwhelming it left her speechless. She mouthed the words anyway. "Thank you." The shepherd blinked slowly, as if acknowledging the vow without needing human language. The ambulance's siren wailed above them, cutting through the night. But inside the vehicle, time felt suspended. Reed glanced at the monitors, the paramedic scribbling notes, Eleanor's quiet sobs, and the girl's steady breathing. All of it orbited around the shepherd, who remained the still point in the storm. "Good boy," Reed whispered under his breath, almost reverently. Sentinel's ears flicked, but he didn't move his head. His attention stayed fixed on the trembling girl at his side. The ambulance slowed as it neared the hospital. The sirens lowered, replaced by the squeal of brakes. Red light flared once more through the rear windows, then steadied. Reed straightened, bracing himself for the swarm outside. Eleanor kissed her daughter's forehead. "We're here, baby. Just a little more." But Maya didn't answer. Her eyes, glassy and wide, flicked up at Sentinel instead. Her lips parted, but no words came. Only a shaky breath, a soft exhale against his fur, as though she trusted him to carry the words she couldn't yet speak. The shepherd blinked again, slow, unflinching, his head still pressed against the stretcher. And Reed knew. The bond wasn't just beginning. It had already been sealed, somewhere in the dark of that trailer, in the growl that had cut through her fear, in the steady eyes that had told her she wasn't alone. The ambulance doors opened, spilling light inside. Voices clamored, hands reached, cameras flashed. But in that brief pause before they were lifted out, time held still. A girl clutched a dog's collar as if it were life itself, and the shepherd stayed steady, silent, unshaken. The nightmare wasn't over. Not yet, but for the first time, the ride away from it carried hope. The house was quiet when they returned, though the silence was different than before. It was no longer the hush of absence, but the fragile quiet of survival. Like a church after bells had rung, the air still vibrating with the memory of sound. Elena carried Maya through the doorway, her daughter's small frame wrapped in the same hospital blanket the paramedics had given her. The girl had not let go of it, clutching its frayed edge even after they'd assured Elena she could take it home. Her eyes were heavy, dazed, but she clung to her mother's neck as if afraid the world might try again to take her away. "Baby," Eleanor whispered, her voice soft, coaxing. "We're home now. You're safe." The house smelled faintly of lavender, the scent from the candle Elena had left burning earlier in the evening before the fair. The wax had long since melted into silence, but its perfume lingered, weaving through the air like a promise of calm. Elena pushed open the door to Maya's bedroom. The nightlight glowed dimly in the corner, casting warm amber over the familiar details. The bookshelf crowded with stuffed animals, the quilt Elena's mother had sewn, the drawings taped crookedly to the wall. The room was unchanged, waiting. Only the child who entered it had been altered. She sat on the edge of the bed, rocking Maya gently, humming a lullaby she had sung when her daughter was much younger. The tune cracked slightly under the weight of the day, but the sound was steady enough to soften Maya's breathing. The girl's eyes fluttered, heavy with exhaustion. For the first time since the nightmare began, her body began to loosen in her mother's arms. Elena leaned her cheek against her daughter's hair, tears slipping silently down her face. She didn't bother to wipe them away. Each one carried both grief and gratitude, grief for the hours lost, gratitude for the miracle of having her child back in her arms. "I've got you," she whispered into the dark strands. "No one's taking you from me again." Maya stirred faintly, shifting so her face pressed against her mother's chest. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Only a breath that trembled, like a word half-formed. Elena didn't push. She simply held her closer, as though the warmth of her embrace could give her daughter's silence permission to heal in its own time. Minutes passed. The girl's breathing deepened, steadying into the rhythm of sleep. Her grip on the blanket loosened, though her hand remained curled against Elena's blouse. Her fingers knotted in the fabric, as if even in dreams she needed that anchor. Elena sat motionless, unwilling to disturb her. The house creaked faintly. The refrigerator hummed, and beyond the walls, the world felt impossibly far away. She was here, with her child asleep against her heart, and that was all that mattered. After a long while, she carefully eased Maya down onto the bed. The quilt was pulled up to her chin. Her small face turned slightly toward the glow of the nightlight. She looked peaceful. Fragile, yes, but peaceful. Elena brushed a kiss across her temple, lingering there, inhaling the familiar scent of her child, as though to memorize it. Then, slowly, she rose. Her eyes caught movement through the window. She walked closer, pulling back the curtain just enough to see. There, in the yard, Sentinel sat. The moon hung low, casting its silver light across the lawn. The shepherd's silhouette was carved against it, tall and steady, his ears pricked forward, his body still as stone. His chest rose and fell with calm certainty, yet every angle of him spoke of readiness. He was not at rest. He was keeping watch. Elena pressed her fingers against the glass, her throat tightening. She had seen courage before, had heard stories of heroes, but nothing compared to the quiet loyalty of the dog who had refused to leave her child's side. Even now, with the night calm and the danger gone, he remained at his post, guarding, waiting, promising. For the first time in hours, Elena let herself smile. It was small, tremulous, but real. "Thank you," she whispered, though the glass and distance swallowed her words. Outside, Sentinel shifted slightly, as if he had heard. His head turned, his amber eyes glinting faintly in the moonlight. For a heartbeat, it seemed he looked straight into her, straight through the glass, and into the vow in her heart. Then, he turned back toward the dark horizon, ears sharp again, ready for anything the night might bring. Elena let the curtain fall, returning to the bed. She slipped under the quilt beside Maya, curling protectively around her daughter. The steady rhythm of the child's breath filled the room, and for the first time since dusk, Elena's eyes closed. In the silence of the small house, a child slept. A mother held on, and outside under the moon, a shepherd stood watch, an unspoken guardian in the night. By morning, the harvest fairgrounds looked like a battlefield that Joy had abandoned overnight. Streamers still clung to poles, their colors faded and limp from dew. The Ferris wheel stood motionless, its bright bulbs extinguished, looming like a hollow crown over an empty kingdom. But the real noise had moved elsewhere, into kitchens, into church basements, into the heart of every shop along Main Street. The town of Willow Creek buzzed with voices, but it wasn't laughter anymore. It was questions sharpened into accusations, whispers twisted into rumors. At the diner, where the scent of coffee usually brought comfort, neighbors leaned across booths, their voices low but heated. They said it was two men, right? Outsiders, but how did they even get in without anyone noticing? I heard one of them worked at the fair, helped set up the rides. That's how they knew where to hide her. No. My cousin swears the sheriff knew something was wrong earlier in the night and ignored it. Each voice layered over the next, a patchwork of fear and suspicion that grew heavier with each telling. Cups of coffee went cold. Plates of toast sat untouched. But the stories spread like wildfire, consuming reason as they went. At the grocery store, mothers clutched their children's hands tighter than usual, glancing over their shoulders at every stranger in the aisle. One woman hissed under her breath, "They should have had more security. Who lets kids just wander like that?" Another answered bitterly, "Don't blame the fair. Blame the police. If that K9 hadn't been there, the girl would be gone forever." In the barber shop, old men shook their heads, their voices gravelly with both anger and grief. "This was supposed to be our town's safe place," one said, his fist striking the arm of his chair. "A family event. And now, it'll never be the same." "They let it happen," another growled. "The organizers cut corners and look what it cost." Across town, in front of the school, teenagers clustered in small knots, their voices a mix of fear and bravado. "I heard they almost got away with it." "No way. That dog would have torn them apart if they tried." "Still, imagine, right there in the middle of the fair, they could have taken anyone." Fear seeped into every conversation, reshaping the way people looked at each other. Strangers were no longer strangers. They were suspects. Outsiders were threats. Even old friends eyed one another with a hesitation that hadn't existed before. At the center of it all was a single name that kept surfacing: Maya Carter. The little girl who had vanished. The girl who had been pulled from a trailer by a snarling shepherd. To the townsfolk, she had become a symbol overnight, proof of both the fragility of their safety and the miracle of its preservation. But the miracle wasn't enough to quiet the anger. At a hastily called meeting in the town hall, the mayor's voice trembled as he tried to calm the crowd. Folding chairs scraped the floor, voices rose and clashed, parents shouted over one another. Where were the guards? Why wasn't there more lighting at the edge of the fair? What background checks were done on the workers? The mayor lifted his hands, sweat beading at his temple. "We are investigating every detail," he insisted. "But we must be grateful the child was found safe. Officer Reed and his K9. He shouldn't have had to save her," a woman screamed from the back, her face red with rage. "She shouldn't have been taken at all." The room erupted, anger spilling into every corner. Some pointed fingers at the organizers for negligence, others at the sheriff's department for being unprepared. The weight of guilt and fear needed somewhere to land, and it landed everywhere. Outside, on the steps of the hall, conversations carried in hushed but furious tones. "Did you hear one of the men had been hanging around town all week?" No one stopped him. "My sister says the fair committee cut costs this year, hired fewer guards. They can spin it however they want. The truth is, we failed that little girl." And through every whispered rumor, one truth settled like ash. Willow Creek was not the same place it had been before the fair. The illusion of safety had cracked, and once cracked, it could not be pieced back together so easily. Back at her house, Eleanor sat by Maya's bed, stroking her daughter's hair as the girl dozed fitfully. She could hear the murmur of neighbors outside her window, voices carrying in the late morning air. She didn't need to make out the words to know what they were saying. Anger had a sound of its own. Sharp, brittle, relentless. She closed her eyes, pressing her forehead to Maya's. "Let them talk," she whispered. "All that matters is you're here." But even as she said it, she knew the town's unrest would ripple back to them. Every rumor, every accusation, would be another wave crashing against the fragile peace she was trying to build inside her daughter's room. Outside in the yard, Sentinel lay beneath the shade of the oak tree. His ears twitched at every passing voice, his eyes calm but attentive. He did not care for rumors or blame. His world was simple, absolute. The girl inside was safe, and he would keep her safe still. And as the town tore itself apart in whispers and anger, the shepherd simply stood guard, steady against the storm. The anger of the town burned loudly in the meeting halls and along Main Street, but by evening another current began to flow beneath it, quieter, softer, yet no less powerful. Gratitude. It started with small gestures. A note taped to the front door of the police station, written in a mother's hurried hand. "Thank you for bringing her home. Thank you for reminding us our children are not alone." Another followed, folded neatly into an envelope. "My daughter slept last night without fear because she knows there are dogs like him out there." By morning, the station's front desk was crowded with envelopes. Some were written on notebook paper, torn from school binders, scrawled in children's uneven letters. Others were long, detailed, spilling over with emotion. "To Officer Reed and Sentinel, we will never forget what you did. You gave us back our peace of mind." Food soon followed. Loaves of bread, pies still warm from the oven, trays of roasted chicken, and thermoses of soup were left on the counter by townsfolk who had never set foot inside the station before. An elderly woman pressed a basket of muffins into the receptionist's hands, her eyes shining with tears. "For the dog," she whispered. "Make sure he gets one too." Reed arrived to find the lobby transformed into something that looked more like a community kitchen than a law enforcement office. Officers shuffled papers around pies, balancing coffee mugs on stacks of notes. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon, bread, and gratitude. He stood still in the doorway for a long moment, his chest tightening. He wasn't a man who sought praise. He'd lived too many years seeing the failures to believe much in victories. But this, it was overwhelming. Not for him, though. For Sentinel. The shepherd sat at his side, ears pricked, eyes alert as always. He didn't understand the notes, the words written on paper, but he sniffed the food baskets with quiet curiosity. His nose brushed against one envelope, and Reed almost smiled at the absurdity. The town writing thank you cards to a dog who could never read them, but who had earned them more than anyone. The first family came mid-morning. A father, his wife, and two small children walked into the station with cautious steps. The little boy clutched a stuffed bear in his arms, its fur worn at the edges. The father's voice broke as he extended his hand. "Officer Reed," he said, gripping tightly. Thank you. My son didn't want to let go of me last night. He kept asking if the bad men could take him too. And then he said..." The man's voice cracked. He blinked hard. "He said he wanted a dog like yours, a brave one, a dog that would never let go." Reed swallowed, his throat thick. He shook his head gently. "Don't thank me," he said. His hand dropped to Sentinel's fur. "Thank him. He's the one who found her. He's the reason that little girl is home." The boy, wide-eyed, stepped closer. His tiny hand reached out, trembling, to touch Sentinel's head. The shepherd leaned into the touch, calm and steady. The boy smiled, a fragile thing, but real. Word spread quickly that Reed refused to take credit. At the cafe that afternoon, a man recounted, "I tried to thank him. He just pointed to the dog and said, 'He's the hero.' I only followed him." Soon the notes shifted. More of them bore Sentinel's name than Reed's. To Sentinel, our guardian. Good boy, the best boy. Some were even decorated with paw prints traced by children's fingers dipped in paint. By the third day, someone had painted a banner and strung it across the police station fence. "Thank you, Sentinel." Beneath it, children left small offerings, bones, toys, bowls of water decorated with stickers. The shepherd accepted none of it in the way people hoped. He did not play or wag his tail exuberantly. He simply sat, regal and still, watching, protecting. Yet somehow, that made the town love him more. Reed watched it unfold with a quiet heaviness in his chest. He knew the cycle of towns like this: fear, anger, blame. But he hadn't expected gratitude to rise so fiercely alongside it. And every time he saw Elena's face among the visitors, her eyes soft but tired, Maya clinging to her hand, he knew the gratitude was not just symbolic. It was real. Late one evening, as the sun dipped low, Reed stepped outside with Sentinel. The shepherd lay down on the steps, his gaze on the horizon. Reed leaned against the railing, rubbing a hand over his tired face. "You know," he murmured, his voice low, meant only for the ears at his side. "I've been doing this job a long time. Too many nights I came home with nothing to show but failure. Too many times I couldn't give mothers back their kids. But you gave her back. You gave them all something to believe in." Sentinel didn't move, but his ears flicked, acknowledging the words in his own way. Reed exhaled slowly, his chest loosening. "You're the real hero here, boy, not me." And as the last of the sunset painted the station in gold, the shepherd remained steady, his silhouette sharp against the fading light. A quiet figure of loyalty, carrying the gratitude of a town too shaken to express it any other way. The town square had never looked like this before. Where lanterns once hung during summer dances and holiday parades, there were candles now, hundreds of them. Their flames flickered in the cool night air, each one cupped in hands or set carefully along the courthouse steps, creating a sea of trembling light. The glow reflected in faces lined with grief, anger, and resolve. Mothers held their children close, their arms wrapped protectively around small shoulders. Fathers stood stiff, their jaws set, their eyes scanning the crowd as though daring the night to test them again. Teenagers clustered together, clutching candles as though the wax itself could ward off the darkness. Even the elderly, leaning on canes and walkers, had come. No one in Willow Creek wanted to stay home. Not tonight. At the center of it all stood Eleanor, her daughter pressed firmly against her side. Maya had not let go of Sentinel since they arrived. The shepherd sat steady at her feet, his body pressed lightly against her legs, his presence a wall of strength. The child's hand clung to the thick fur at his neck, her candle trembling slightly in her other hand. The mayor stood on the courthouse steps, his face weary, his suit wrinkled from days of little rest. He lifted his own candle, the wax dripping down onto his knuckles. His voice carried over the crowd, low but firm. "Tonight, we stand together, not as neighbors divided by fear or anger, but as a town united in our promise to protect what is most precious to us, our children." His eyes swept the square, pausing briefly on Maya, then lowering to Sentinel. We have seen what could have been lost, and we have seen what courage can save. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, others raised their candles higher, the flames brightening like stars being born one after another. A woman's voice rang out, breaking the quiet. "No more shadows at our fairgrounds," she cried. "We demand more lights, more guards, more protection." The crowd echoed her words, voices rising, anger simmering just beneath the surface. "No more shadows," they repeated, the chant rolling through the square like a wave. Maya flinched at the noise, her body pressing closer to Sentinel. The shepherd didn't move except to angle his head slightly, leaning against her. She buried her face into his neck for a moment, breathing in the warm, steady scent of him, the thrum of his breath anchoring her in the storm of voices. Eleanor bent low, whispering into her daughter's ear, "It's all right, sweetheart. They're not angry at you. They're fighting to keep you safe." Her lips pressed against Maya's hair. "You've already been so brave. Just hold on to him." And Maya did. The sheriff stepped forward next, his hat in his hands, his eyes heavy with both shame and resolve. "We failed once," he admitted, his voice breaking with honesty. "But never again. I promise you. Every child here will be guarded like they are my own." The crowd responded with a mix of applause and tears. For many, it wasn't enough. But it was something. It was a vow, spoken aloud under the fragile light of candles. A pastor from the local church led a prayer. Heads bowed, candles lowered. The silence was pierced only by the crackle of flames and the distant chirp of crickets. He spoke of strength, of resilience, of light pushing back against darkness. Through it all, Maya stayed pressed against Sentinel. She didn't bow her head or close her eyes. Instead, she stared at the flickering waves of candles before her, the flames mirrored in her wide gaze. Her fingers stroked absently at Sentinel's fur, her small hand curling and uncurling, clinging not out of fear this time, but of trust. When the prayer ended, a hush lingered. Then, slowly, people began stepping forward to lay flowers at the courthouse steps, to leave notes, to place drawings made by children. A crayon sketch showed a little girl holding the paw of a large shepherd, their smiles wide beneath a sky of stars. Another note, written in a careful child's hand, read, "Thank you for finding her. Thank you for keeping us safe." Elena's chest tightened as she watched. She knelt down, brushing her hand over her daughter's cheek. "See, Maya, they're all here because of you. Because of what you went through. You're not alone." Maya's lips trembled. She didn't speak, but she lifted her candle slightly higher, her hand steady now. The flame glowed against her face, softening her features. For a moment, she looked less like a frightened child and more like a quiet symbol. Fragile, but radiant. Sentinel shifted at her side, his head lifting, his ears catching the night. His gaze moved slowly across the crowd, vigilant even in this gathering of peace. His body was calm, his tail resting on the ground, but his presence radiated the same vow that filled the square. Never again. The mayor's voice closed the vigil, gentle but resolute. "We carry fear tonight, but we also carry hope. Let us not forget the darkness we saw, but let us remember the light that pushed it back." Candles rose as one, their glow filling the square. The light was fragile, flickering in the breeze, but together It was enough to chase back the shadows. And in the midst of it, a little girl leaned against a shepherd, his fur warm beneath her trembling hand. And for the first time since the nightmare began, her eyes stayed open. She didn't look away from the light. The courthouse in Willow Creek had always been more symbolic than functional, a sun-faded brick relic that rarely saw more than property disputes or traffic violations. But now, its halls carried the weight of a crime that had shaken the entire town. Prosecutors moved briskly through its narrow corridors, their arms full of files, police reports, witness statements, photographs of the rusted trailer where a child had been held. Every detail mattered. The town demanded justice. At the head of a long oak table stood Sandra Harlow, the lead prosecutor, her pen tapping against a yellow pad. 2 counts of kidnapping, endangerment of a minor, intent to traffic. We pursue the maximum. Her voice was clipped but steely. At the far end sat Officer Reed, sentinel stretched at his feet, alert even in stillness. Sandra's gaze met his. You'll be first on the stand. The jury needs to know how this child was saved. Reed's voice was calm. I'll tell them the truth. He found her. His hand brushed Sentinel's fur, grounding himself. Without him, we'd still be searching. Sandra's eyes softened briefly. Then make sure they know that. Across town, Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, papers spread before her, like an ocean she couldn't swim. Testimony instructions blurred before her eyes. Each line dragged her back to the night her daughter had been stolen. Her hands shook. She rose quickly, pacing. It's over. She's safe, she whispered. But the words felt fragile. On the couch, Maya sat beside Sentinel, her small hand buried in his fur, as she turned the pages of a book she hardly looked at. Her lips moved faintly, whispering words only the dog could hear. Sentinel's ears flicked in response, his tail brushing the floor. Elena's chest tightened. She had promised to testify, for Maya, for Sentinel, but each imagined word dragged her back into that trailer, into the darkness and fear. The next morning, Reed sat across from Sandra for trial prep. His account was precise. How Sentinel had been given Maya's scarf, how he tracked her scent through the fairgrounds, how he froze at the trailer door. But when Sandra asked what happened inside, his voice thickened. He described Sentinel growling, lunging forward, planting himself between the child and her captors. If not for him, Reed said quietly, brushing the shepherd's head, we'd be preparing for a funeral. The room went still. Sandra nodded. Then we'll make sure the jury understands that. At home, Eleanor faltered through questions from a victim advocate. What did you feel when you realized your daughter was missing? Her voice cracked, breaking into sobs. I can't say it out loud. If I do, it's like it's happening again. The advocate's voice was gentle. You don't have to be perfect, just honest. Elena's eyes drifted to Maya, curled into Sentinel's side, whispering into his ear. The shepherd blinked, steady and unmovable. Eleanor drew a shaky breath. Yes, I'll do it. For her. For him. The courthouse waiting room was too large for a child. Fluorescent lights buzzed above, casting a pale glow over the benches. Maya sat curled in the corner, knees to her chest, silent. Her ribbon, once bright, hung frayed in her hair. The victim's advocate knelt before her. Maya, the court is asking if you'd be willing to speak today, to tell the judge what happened in that trailer. Elena's heart clenched. You don't have to, sweetheart, the advocate added softly. Just a few words, enough to make sure they never hurt another child again. Maya shook her head violently, burying her face. Her body trembled, and then Sentinel moved. He padded across the tile, lowering himself against her legs, his head resting gently on her knees. Maya froze, then lifted her face slowly. His amber eyes held hers, steady and unblinking. Her small arms wrapped around his neck. Her trembling eased. Whispering into his fur, she found her voice. "I'll try." Elena's tears spilled freely. A fragile victory had been won. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and old dust. Townsfolk filled the benches, tense and silent. At the defense table sat the two men, one gaunt and twitching, the other leaning back, his smirk sharp and cruel. His eyes landed on Maya. Elena tightened her grip on her daughter. "Don't look at them. Look at me. Look at him." Her hand pressed to Sentinel's back. The bailiff called Maya's name. She froze, fear rooting her in place. Reed leaned close. "The court's approved it. Sentinel can go with her." The judge's voice was solemn. "If the child wishes, the K9 may accompany her." Gasps rippled through the room. Maya's hand slid to Sentinel's harness. With trembling steps, guided by his weight at her side, she crossed the silent room toward the stand. At the witness stand, her hand shook as she swore the oath. Sentinel pressed against her leg, steadying her. When asked to speak, silence fell heavy. Maya's eyes dropped to her lap, her ribbon twisting in her fingers. Then Sentinel shifted closer, resting his head on her knee. Slowly, she turned to meet his gaze. Her fingers dug into his fur. She closed her eyes, drew a breath, and whispered, "They took me." The room froze. Every sound vanished. "They tied my hands. They put me in the trailer. They said I couldn't go home." Her voice cracked. She pressed her face to Sentinel's fur, steadied, and went on. "I was scared. I wanted my mama. But he found me. He wouldn't let them touch me. He growled so loud and they stopped. He saved me." Elena sobbed into her hands. Reed sat straighter, pride burning in his chest. The prosecutor's voice was gentle. "Maya, who took you?" Her small hand lifted, pointing to the defendants. "Them." Gasps erupted. The judge's gavel thundered for order, but nothing could silence the power of her words. Maya curled once more into Sentinel's fur. "I told the truth," she whispered, and the shepherd, calm and steady, pressed closer, as if to say, "Yes. And you were brave." The house was still when it began. Outside, cicadas hummed, the clock ticked softly, and for a moment, Elena believed peace had returned. Then Maya screamed. The sound split the night, raw and terrified. Elena bolted down the hall to find her daughter thrashing beneath the quilt, eyes wide but trapped in a nightmare only she could see. "No! Don't lock me in! Please!" Elena dropped to her knees, wrapping her arms around her. "Shh, baby. It's Mama. You're safe. You're home." But Maya didn't hear. Her fists beat against Elena's chest, her sobs jagged and broken. Then Sentinel appeared. He padded softly into the room, moonlight glinting in his eyes. Without hesitation, he leapt onto the bed and pressed his head firmly against Maya's chest, anchoring her with his steady weight. The child gasped, clutching his fur. "Sentinel." Her sobs slowed into hiccups, her body curling into his warmth. The nightmare loosened its grip, replaced by the steady rhythm of the shepherd's breath. Elena kissed her daughter's damp hair, whispering, You're safe. He's here. He won't let anyone hurt you. Minutes passed before Maya's breathing eased, her grip loosening on the dog's neck. Sentinel did not move. His silent vow kept her tethered until sleep returned. Elena, tears streaming, whispered into the quiet. You saved her twice now. The clinic smelled faintly of crayons and peppermint tea. Eleanor sat rigid, her hands white-knuckled, while Maya perched stiffly beside her, eyes lowered, twisting her sleeve. Across from them, Dr. Lisbeth Carver smiled gently. Maya, I know it's hard to be here. We don't have to rush. Maya pressed closer to her mother, lips sealed. Doctor. Carver's gaze shifted toward the shepherd stretched calmly on the rug. Officer Reed told me about him. Sentinel helped save you. Maybe he can help you heal too. Maya's eyes flicked toward him, a flicker of light in her silence. Dr. Carver asked softly, Would you like him closer? Maya gave the smallest nod. With a whistle, Sentinel padded forward, lowering himself at Maya's side. Her hand moved instinctively to his neck, her breath slowing as her fingers tangled in his fur. You don't have to tell me yet, Dr. Carver said, but if you want, you can tell the Sentinel. Sometimes it's easier when no one talks back. Maya leaned down, pressing her lips close to the shepherd's ear. Her voice trembled, little more than a whisper. They tied my hands. It hurt. Sentinel didn't flinch. He simply stayed, steady and silent. Elena pressed a hand to her mouth, tears spilling. Session by session, the pattern repeated. Maya refused questions from Dr. Carver, but once Sentinel settled beside her, she bent to whisper, I cried, but nobody heard me. I thought Mama would never find me again. I was so scared of the dark. Her words spilled into his ear, halting and fragile, but spoken. Dr. Carver nodded gently, echoing back with care. You felt very alone. You were so brave, even when you were afraid. One afternoon, something shifted. After whispering into Sentinel's fur, Maya lifted her head, her eyes flicking to Dr. Carver. For the first time, she repeated her words aloud. They said I couldn't go home. Eleanor gasped, covering her mouth. Dr. Carver's smile was steady. And now you are home, because you held on until Sentinel found you. Maya bent quickly to kiss Sentinel's ear, her cheeks damp. The shepherd blinked slowly, patient, his silence giving her space to breathe. By the end of the month, she no longer entered stiffly. She went straight to Sentinel, dropping beside him, her small hand tangling in his fur. Her words to the world were still few, but to him, her whispers had become rivers. For Elena, hearing her daughter's voice return, even if it began in the ear of a shepherd, was a gift she could never repay. One afternoon, sunlight stretched gold across the yard. Elena stood at the kitchen window, tea cooling in her hand, watching Maya outside with Sentinel. At first, it was the same as every day, the girl clinging to him, following his every step. But then Maya bent down, picked up an old tennis ball, and held it uncertainly. Sentinel's ears perked. His amber eyes locked on the ball, body taut with expectation. Maya swung awkwardly, the ball bouncing only a few feet. Sentinel lunged after it, bounding across the grass, triumphant as he returned it to her feet. Maya's eyes widened. Slowly, a smile broke across her face. She threw again, farther this time. Sentinel leapt, sun glinting off his coat. Elena pressed a hand to her mouth. She hadn't seen that smile in months. When Sentinel dropped the ball again, Maya giggled at the slobbery mess. The sound escaped before she could stop it. Soft, quick, but laughter. Real laughter. Elena staggered to the door, tears blurring her vision. Outside, Maya clapped her hands as Sentinel bounded back with the ball, her laughter rising a little louder. Elena dropped to her knees in the yard, sobbing as she called softly, "Maya." The girl turned, ball in hand, her eyes wide. "Mama?" Elena reached for her. "Don't stop. That's the sound I've prayed for." Maya ran into her arms, Sentinel pressing close beside them. Elena kissed her daughter's hair, whispering fiercely, "You laughed again." Maya tucked her face against her mother's shoulder. But when Sentinel nudged the ball into her lap, she giggled once more, unable to hold it back. This time, Elena laughed too, through her tears. And for a long while, they stayed like that. The mother, the daughter, and the shepherd in the sunlight. The ball lay forgotten in the grass, while laughter, fragile and miraculous, carried across the yard. By late summer, a single question echoed through Willow Creek. Should the harvest fair return? For nearly a century, the fair had been the soul of the town. Lanterns, laughter, children chasing prizes. But after Maya's abduction, the fairgrounds were scarred. Some said holding it again would be cruel. Others argued that cancelling it meant letting fear win. The town hall swelled that evening with anxious voices. Parents, farmers, and shopkeepers filled every chair. Mayor Holloway banged his gavel, sweat beading his brow. "Order!" From the back, a woman's voice cracked. "How can we send our children back to the place where that little girl was taken?" Murmurs rippled. Too soon, never safe again. But another man stood. "If we cancel, we let those men steal from all of us. The fair belongs to this town." A teacher's voice rang steady. "We've always told our children Willow Creek is safe. If we shut the fair down, we prove otherwise." The room erupted. Fear against defiance, grief against pride. In the corner, Elena sat silent, hands knotted in her lap. Maya was home with Sentinel, but every gaze seemed to turn toward her. The mother whose child had been taken. Her chest tightened. She remembered Maya's screams, the empty hand she had lost in the crowd. Yet she also remembered her daughter's laughter in the yard, fragile but alive, as Sentinel fetched a tennis ball. Slowly, she rose. Her voice shook, but it carried. "I don't know if I'll ever walk those fairgrounds without hearing my daughter cry. But Maya is healing. And healing means not letting fear decide who we are. If we cancel the fair, we are teaching our children that the darkness is stronger than we are." Tears glistened in her eyes. "I can't let her believe that. I won't." The hall fell silent. An old man stood, hat in hand. "She's right. We fix the lights, double security. But we bring the fair back, for the kids." The mayor's gavel struck again. "We will make it safer than it's ever been. That is my promise." As the crowd dispersed, divided but thoughtful, a seed had been planted. Fear and hope, waiting to see which would grow. That night, Eleanor found Maya asleep against Sentinel on the rug. Kneeling beside them, she whispered, "Maybe they're right. Maybe you'll help her face it." Sentinel's amber eyes flickered open, steady as stone. Days later, Eleanor parked at the empty fairgrounds. The Ferris wheel loomed rusted and still, booths shuttered, carousel horses frozen mid-gallop. Her hands gripped the wheel until her knuckles ached. In the back seat, Maya sat pale and silent, fingers twisted in her lap. Sentinel wore his vest, alert beside her. Elena turned, voice trembling. "Sweetheart, we don't have to do this. We can go home." Maya didn't answer. Her small hand reached for Sentinel's fur. He leaned into her touch. Something in her eyes steadied. Elena nodded. "Just a little while, and he'll be with you every step." They stepped out together. Gravel crunched underfoot. The air smelled faintly of rust and grass. Maya's hand clutched the shepherd's vest, her grip so tight the leather creaked. Sentinel walked perfectly in stride with her, his body brushing her side, steady as a heartbeat. They reached the carousel. The painted horses, once bright, looked eerie in stillness. Maya froze, breath quick and shallow. Her lips parted in a whimper. Elena crouched. "It's all right, baby. This place can't hurt you anymore. Nothing's here but us." But Sentinel spoke first in his own way, pressing firmly into Maya's legs, then sitting solid and immovable. His amber eyes stayed locked on the carousel. Maya slid to her knees, burying her face in his neck. "I don't want to go back there," she whispered. Elena stroked her hair, her throat aching. "You don't have to ride. We're just showing you it's still a place for joy. And you're not alone this time. He's here." For a long moment, Maya clung to him. Then, trembling, she lifted her face. Her hands stayed tangled in his fur, but she took one step forward. Sentinel moved with her. Another step. Another. The horses no longer seemed so monstrous. The chipped paint softened in sunlight. "It looks smaller," Maya whispered. "That's because you're braver now," Elena murmured. At the platform's edge, Maya reached out, touching a faded saddle. Her hand shook, then steadied as Sentinel pressed against her side. With a determined breath, she climbed up. Her foot slipped on the stirrup, but she clutched the brass pole, swinging her leg over until she sat astride the horse. Her heart hammered, but she glanced down. Sentinel sat directly below, head lifted, gaze sweeping the grounds. He was her anchor. Elena's voice wavered. "Do you want me to turn it on?" For a moment, Maya shook her head. Then she looked at Sentinel. His calm eyes answered for her. She whispered, "Yes." Elena pressed the switch. The old generator groaned, gears grinding. Slowly, the carousel lurched to life. Its warped melody trickled from tired speakers, circling the air. Maya tensed, gripping the pole tight. Her breath came sharp and shallow, until Sentinel's eyes found hers. Unblinking, certain. Her shoulders loosened. Her grip eased. And then, as the platform carried her in gentle circles, something bloomed across her face. A smile. Small at first, trembling at the edges, then growing wider, brighter, until her eyes glowed with a light that had been missing for so long. Elena's tears streamed freely. "Thank God," she whispered. And then it came, the sound she thought she might never hear again. Maya laughed, soft at first, broken, then louder as the carousel turned. Her body swayed with the rhythm, no longer rigid with fear. Sentinel never moved, never blinked. His silence was her fortress. Around and around she rode, her laughter echoing across the deserted fairgrounds, washing shadows from the corners. The carousel was no longer a place of terror. It was becoming something new. When the ride slowed, Maya slid carefully down. Her legs wobbled, but Sentinel pressed against her, steadying her once more. She crouched beside him, throwing her arms around his neck. "I wasn't scared," she whispered into his fur. "Not with you here." Elena knelt too, pulling her daughter close, kissing her damp cheeks. "You did it, baby. You took it back." Maya leaned into her mother, but her hand never left Sentinel's coat. For the first time since that night, laughter lingered in the fairgrounds, not as memory, but as something alive again. The town square wore its banners again, not for a festival or parade, but for something heavier: gratitude. Rows of folding chairs filled the space before the courthouse steps, neighbors shoulder to shoulder. Parents held their children close. Eyes drifted to the stage where a German shepherd sat, vest gleaming. Sentinel. Beside him stood Officer Reed, stiff in uniform. The mayor stepped forward, voice carrying across the square. "Ladies and gentlemen of Willow Creek, today we honor a hero. On the night we all remember, it was Sentinel who led Officer Reed through the chaos. Sentinel who followed the trail into darkness. Sentinel who stood between a child and the men who would have stolen her from us forever." Courage, his voice thickened, is not measured by size or words, but by the heart. He opened a small box, revealing a medal strung on a deep blue ribbon. "On behalf of this town, I present Sentinel with the Willow Creek Medal of Honor, the first ever awarded to a K-9. Reed bent to fasten it, until a small voice called out, "I want to." Maya stood with her mother at the stage's edge, ribbon slipping loose in her hair, her eyes shimmering with resolve. "He saved me. I should do it." The mayor glanced at Reed, who gave a quiet nod. Elena led her forward. The crowd hushed as Maya's trembling hands lifted the ribbon. Sentinel lowered his head, still as stone, as she slipped the medal over his neck. It gleamed against his dark vest. Maya's lips curved into a fragile smile. She leaned into his fur and whispered, "This is yours, always." Applause broke like thunder. People rose to their feet, clapping, crying, cheering. Children held candles from the vigil high in the air. But Sentinel's eyes never left Maya. The only recognition he had ever needed was the child he had saved. That evening, Elena's kitchen glowed with warmth, the smell of roasted chicken filling the house. Reed arrived awkwardly, hat in hand. He was unused to family tables, but tonight was different. "You came," Elena said with a tired smile. "You don't say no to roasted chicken," he answered, glancing toward Sentinel, who had already padded past him to Maya's side. The shepherd lay beside her on the couch, head on her knees, as though he belonged there. Dinner was quiet, but easy. When the dishes were cleared, Maya disappeared and returned with a worn storybook. She settled onto the rug, Sentinel curling protectively around her. She opened the book, finger-tracing words. Her voice was shaky at first, halting. She stumbled over syllables, cheeks flushing. Then she glanced at Sentinel. His calm amber eyes met hers, and she began again. "Once," she read, "there was a little bird who was afraid to fly." Her voice steadied line by line, gaining strength. The little bird thought she would never be brave enough, but then she heard a song that told her she wasn't alone. Eleanor leaned against the doorway, tears bright. Reed's throat tightened as he listened. He had seen her whisper through tears in court, but this was different. This was not survival. This was living. Maya giggled when Sentinel nudged her hand, knocking the book sideways. She patted his head, laughing as she continued reading, her voice stronger than before. Reed murmured quietly to Eleanor, "You know, dogs like him don't choose lightly. He was trained to obey, to live by discipline. But this," he gestured toward the child and dog, "this is a choice. He's chosen her. Choose you. And once they do, it's for life." Eleanor pressed her hand to her lips, whispering, "Family." Reed smiled faintly, eyes wet. "Yeah. Family." Later, the house was quiet. Lamplight glowed honey gold across the rug where Maya had fallen against Sentinel. Storybook forgotten. Elena watched from the doorway, heart clenching at the sight. Her daughter safe, her guardian steadfast. She knelt beside them, brushing her hand through the shepherd's fur. Her voice was low, reverent. "Thank you for finding her, for guarding her, for standing watch when I couldn't. You are her silent guardian." Sentinel blinked slowly, his eyes lifting to meet hers. No words were needed. His stillness was answer enough. Maya stirred, ribbon slipping from her hair. She pressed her cheek into his neck, her voice muffled but fierce. "Promise you'll never leave me." Elena's breath caught. Tears filled her eyes as her daughter clung tighter. "Please, don't ever let them take me again." The shepherd shifted, lowering his head until his chin rested against her shoulder. He stayed, solid as stone. Maya trembled once more, then stilled. "Promise," she whispered again, and Sentinel answered in his way, pressing his nose gently against her cheek. Maya gasped softly, her body eased. "Okay," she whispered. "I believe you." Elena's tears spilled freely. She wrapped her arms around them both, mother, daughter, and dog, bound together in golden lamplight. Outside, the wind rattled the trees, but inside, a vow had been made, not in words, but in trust. At last, Maya kissed Sentinel's muzzle. "Good night, my guardian." The shepherd blinked, leaning into her touch. Eleanor guided her daughter to bed, Sentinel following close. He curled at the foot of the quilt, eyes glowing faintly in the dark, unblinking, unyielding. Eleanor lingered in the doorway, whispering through her tears, "Silent guardian." His ears flicked, his gaze never leaving the child he had promised without words, without hesitation, to protect. And in that quiet night, the vow became true. The night was deep, the kind of quiet that made the little house feel wrapped in glass. Only the hum of the refrigerator stirred the silence. Moonlight fell across Maya's floor, silvering the edges of her quilt. At the foot of her bed lay Sentinel, steady as ever, but sleep betrayed her. In the dream, she was back in the trailer, ropes biting her wrists, air heavy with rust and oil. Men's voices echoed like thunder. She called for her mother, but only darkness answered. Tears burned. "Not again. Please." Then came the growl. It rolled through the shadows, deep and fierce. The trailer shuddered with the force of a body slamming against it. Another crash, the door burst open. Sentinel filled the frame, teeth bared, eyes glowing like embers. He surged forward, every line of his body promising, "No one will touch you again." The men stumbled back, fear overtaking cruelty. Maya's ropes seemed to fall away by sheer will. She crawled forward, burying herself in his fur. The nightmare dissolved into safety. For the first time, her dream ended not with terror, but relief. She stirred in her bed, whispering, "Sentinel." His ears flicked, and he pressed his muzzle to her ankle. There was no scream this time, only peace. At the doorway, Eleanor froze, expecting cries. Instead, she saw her daughter asleep, her hand tangled in the shepherd's coat, her face serene. Tears blurred her vision. "Thank you," she whispered. Weeks later, the community center buzzed with voices. Folding chairs filled the hall, sunlight slanting through tall windows. The mood was not as heated as past town meetings. There was still sorrow, yes, but something gentler too. Hope. At the front sat Eleanor with Maya beside her. Sentinels stretched across their feet, the metal shining on his vest. Children stared at him in awe. Parents' faces softened. Officer Reed stood at the podium, posture stiff, but voice trembling. We all remember that night. We remember the dog who refused to stop until he brought one of our children home. But what we've seen since is just as important. Sentinel hasn't just protected, he's healed. He's given Maya her voice, her laughter. A murmur swept the crowd. Reed's voice steadied. We believe what worked for one child can work for others. Children who've suffered trauma can find safety again. With dogs like Sentinel, we propose a program, pairing trained canines with the kids who need them most. Gasps, whispers, then silence. Elena rose, her hand on her daughter's shoulder. I watched fear steal my child's voice, and I watched her begin to heal, not because of me, not because of therapy alone, but because of him. Her gaze dropped to Sentinel, her tears spilling. He gave her what no one else could, the steady reminder that she wasn't alone. Maya hesitated, then lifted her face. In a voice soft but carrying, she whispered, He made me safe again. The words rippled through the room like a stone through still water. Parents pressed tissues to their eyes. The mayor stood, voice thick. You've heard it from her. I can't think of a more worthy cause. Willow Creek will pledge funds, and I know this town will give what it can. Applause rose, strong and determined. Some shouted, For the kids! Children pointed toward Sentinel, their faces shining. Reed's voice cut through the clapping, firm now. Sentinel will be the face of this program. Not just because of what he's done, but because of what he represents. Hope, healing, courage, when words aren't enough. The hall thundered with applause. Elena wept freely, holding her daughter close. On the rug, Maya pressed her cheek into Sentinel's fur. He didn't move. He didn't need to. His presence alone spoke for him. By autumn's end, the harvest fair returned. Lanterns strung across the square swayed in the breeze, their glow golden against the night. Fiddles played, voices sang, the air scented with caramel apples and kettle corn. Where screams had once filled the darkness, laughter now reclaimed the ground. At the center of it all walked Maya. Her ribbon was tied neatly in her braid, her chin lifted, her steps steady. One hand rested on Sentinel's vest, the metal gleaming in lantern light. Children pointed, whispering his name. But Maya didn't shrink. She smiled, her laughter carrying lightly through the air. Elena followed close, her eyes wet as she watched her daughter walk tall again. Only months ago, Maya had trembled in silence, too afraid to sleep, too afraid to speak. Now she walked at the center of the fair, guarded by the dog who had never left her side. The carousel spun again, its music chiming sweet and imperfect. Maya paused, Sentinel sitting steady beside her. Her hand tightened on his vest. She glanced down at him. His amber eyes met hers, calm, certain, unyielding. Her lips curved into a smile. Together, they stepped forward, and as the lanterns swayed above and music spilled into the night, Willow Creek reclaimed more than its fare. It reclaimed its heart. They passed the carousel, its music bright, its horses painted fresh with new coats of color. Maya hesitated only briefly, her hand tightening on Sentinel's vest. The shepherd glanced up at her, his eyes steady, and she smiled before stepping closer. She touched the polished brass pole of one horse, then turned to her mother, her voice stronger than Elena remembered it ever being. "Can I ride again?" Eleanor's throat caught. She nodded quickly, blinking away tears. "Yes, baby. Ride." Maya climbed onto the horse, her laughter ringing out as the carousel began to turn. Sentinel circled the ride once, then sat firmly at its base, his gaze never leaving her. His ears twitched with the music, his eyes steady and unblinking. Parents pointed him out to their children, their whispers full of reverence. "That's the one. That's the dog who saved her." Eleanor stood at the edge of the ride, tears streaming freely now. She pressed her hand over her heart, feeling it swell until she thought it might burst. She remembered the scream under the fireworks, the endless hours of terror. She remembered her daughter trembling in her arms, broken by silence. And she remembered the shepherd bursting through the dark, standing guard over what she had thought lost. Now, under lantern light, she watched her daughter lean back, her hair flying, her laughter alive again. It was the sound of freedom, the sound of a childhood returned. The carousel slowed, and Maya hopped down, running straight to Sentinel. She threw her arms around his neck, pressing her cheek into his fur. "You stayed," she whispered, loud enough this time that Elena heard. The shepherd blinked, leaning into her touch. Maya turned to her mother, her smile radiant. "He always stays." Elena nodded, her tears glistening in the lantern light. She crouched down, pulling both her daughter and the shepherd into her arms. "Yes," she whispered, "and so will I." The music swelled, lanterns flickered, and the fair spun on with laughter and light. For the first time since that night, the shadows no longer held power here. And as Elena stood, her hand resting on her daughter's shoulder, she realized that healing didn't come all at once. It came like this: one laugh, one promise, one steady step into the light. Under the glow of the lanterns, with Sentinel's vest gleaming beside her, Maya walked forward into a world that had given her back her childhood. There's something about the quiet loyalty of a German shepherd that reminds us of what truly matters. They don't ask for recognition or reward, just to be near, to protect, to love without condition. Stories like Maya and Sentinel's are powerful because they touch that place in all of us that longs for connection, for trust that doesn't break. If you've ever looked into your dog's eyes and felt understood without a word, you know the gift they bring to our lives. These animals carry us through our hardest days and celebrate with us on the brightest ones. They make us better simply by staying beside us. If you'd like to explore a way to connect even more deeply with your own dog, I came across a resource that might help. It's not fancy, just thoughtful guidance for anyone who loves their dog and wants to strengthen that bond. I'll leave the link here for you to take a look, if you feel like it. Thank you for sharing this story with me tonight. Hold your dogs a little closer, and remember, they're not just pets. They're family, and sometimes our quietest heroes.